he's past his prime. He ain't much. Bits and pieces, and this and that. But if you can clobber 20 to 25 home runs, knock in 75 to 85 runs, and hit above 250, we can win a championship.
Hi everyone, this is Will O'Toole welcoming you to another edition of Park Creek Sports History. I have to be honest, Howard has given me another bit of inspiration for this week's show, and that is on the American League DH. And I'm going to do probably as best a biography on the original DHs in the American League. It's a fascinating story how we got here because Howard and I send each other emails back and forth during the week. And this week, of course, we had the passing of both Jerry Grody and Fritz Peterson, who is a very capable left-handed pitcher for the Yankees. In fact, he won 20 games, made the American League All-Star team in 1970. And this goes to this. When Howard was a kid, many, many years ago, only just a few years ago, he actually went to a card signing convention, let's just say. And he got the autographs of Ron Blomberg, and he has a great story. And I think what we'll do is during an annual show for what we did last year with Howard's relative who was a boxer from English descent. We did a nice show on that. I'd love to do another show with Howard, all things baseball, all things sports, etc. But this week, I want to just hone in on the original DHs for every American League team, starting with 1973. Of course, that was the first year. And of course, Ron Blomberg. And I do have pictures or baseball pictures. Let's just show some of the baseball cards from the past generations. Of course, David Ortiz is up there. The reason being is that Ortiz is probably simply the quintessential designated hitter of all time. Led the Red Sox, of course, to 3 World Series and just hit like a beast as a designated hitter. Here's where I'm coming from with the designated hitter. Originally, and this is the beauty of baseball, and just like any other sport, they incorporated a new rule. And of course, the first few years of the new rule, and that being the case is the designated hitter, I was looking about how managers were looking at this added hitter in the lineup. Now, many of them, and we're going to show you this right now, many of them started with guys like Rico Carty, who was not a great defensive fielder, had some injuries, was past, let's say, the Bill James prime of 27. He was in his 30s and became a designated hitter for not just the Indians, but also the Texas Rangers and several other teams. But he was able to keep his career alive by being a designated hitter. And he was one of the first. In fact, ready for this, Ron Blomberg, of course, was the first American League designated hitter for the Yankees. He drew a walk against Louis Tiant. What people don't realize, in that series up in Boston, I do remember it so well because I was in the 7th grade, and I think it was over Easter break. The Red Sox drilled the Yankees 3 straight games, and in that first game, I think Tiant beat them 15-5. And then the Red Sox won the next one, scoring double digits, and I think the final one. So they had their own, what you consider, Boston Massacre in 1973. The Yankees, of course, would get revenge in 1978 with that 4-game sweep in Boston. But anyway, Ron Blomberg was the very first Yankee who was a DH, and he pretty much went along the same line. Carty and Blomberg were the same, kind of like line drive hitters, little bit of power. I know that Carty probably had far better power. In 1970, he had 25 home runs to make the National League All-Star team as a starter in left field. He was the first write-in candidate during when the fans got the vote back. Pretty interesting. And, of course, Ortiz was a beast, Hall of Famer with the Red Sox. The 3 years that he played with the Red Sox in the World Series, ready for this, he was 30-103, 35-117, and 41-139. because I did do a study of the 23 World Championship teams that the American League has had since the advent of the designated hitter. I do have the averages down to about between 22 and 25 home runs, 76 and 84. Why? Because the first few years, and this is particularly with the Yankees, here's what the American League DH, according to Baseball Reference, was. Duran Johnson was the 73 DH for the Oakland A's. He had the most games as a DH. He had 19 home runs, 81 RBIs. He was not their first. That happened to be their very first was Bill North. And he was also the first DH to be the leadoff hitter in a game. Now, where am I taking all my stats from? And I'll talk about that in a little bit. These were on opening day. So these were the opening day 1973 DHs for all of the American League teams. In 1974, Baseball Reference has Jesus Alou as basically the primary DH for the Oakland A's. But he only had 200 home runs and 15 RBIs. To be very frank, Gene Tennis, I know, was a DH for them. They had several guys that filled in, but of course, it seemed like Alou had the most. And then the Yankees in 77 had Carlos May having, I guess, the most games as the designated hitter, according to Baseball Reference. He only had 2 homers, 16 RBIs, and hit 227. And then the following year, they had Cliff Johnson, 6 homers, 19 RBIs, 184. So what I did was I took those 4 years out as the managers were kind of learning the game and learning how to use a designated hitter. It's kind of fascinating. And really, what now? If you can get a guy, and this is from the championship teams in the American League. So we're talking about the Yankees during their glory days. We're talking about the 2 Minnesota teams in 87 and 91, the back-to-back Toronto Blue Jays of 92 and 93, the recently champion Texas Rangers, the now defending champion Rangers, the Astros, even the 2002 Anaheim Angels. So I have several of these teams. But basically, here's what it comes out to. Without those first 4 American League World Series teams, 1973 to 78, here's what you're looking for. If your DH could go 25, 84, and hit above 250, I have it like 261, 260, actually 262, I think it was. You got a really good chance of winning the World Series. Now, is this written in stone? Obviously not. But I think that the DH, obviously, just like any other position, has taken a life of its own. And where you can obviously see that many of the players who started as the opening day DHs, and I'm going to go to the second page, take a look. They have a number of things in common. All right, you have Tony O, Orlando Cepeda, and I'm going to say, even actually David Ortiz, but Rico Carty, Gates Brown, Johnny Ellis. They are all, let's say, they were all past the Bill James prime number of 27. So they were all in their early 30s. For Cepeda and for Cepeda, he was, getting up there 36, 35, 36, maybe even 37 for the Red Sox. All right. So what they were doing was basically bringing in older players who couldn't maybe play the field as well as they could have 4 or 5 years ago, and then turning them into designated hitters. And it does take some effort to be a designated hitter. Put it this way. You could tell that just judging, ready for this, by opening day. And you know what? I've just decided I'm going to come back and visit this because I want to do a part 2 at this DH because it is kind of interesting. I'm just going to focus on the first DHs that year. Ready for this? They had 46 total at-bats in those 12 DHs that day in 1973, all on different days, obviously. They had 2 runs scored, only 10 hits, and 4 runs batted in. The very first designated hitter to hit an opening day home run, at least, was future Hall of Famer Tony Oliva. and he hit it off Catfish Hunter. Obviously, he had the best day of any designated hitter. He was 2 for 4, 3 RBIs, a run scored. Orlando Cepeda with the 15 runs. Here's the bizarre thing. He was 0 for 6. He was actually 0 for 6 in his debut as a designated hitter for the Red Sox, even though the Red Sox would sweep and drill the Yankees in 3 straight games. Ready for this? Ollie Brown, who I've spoken about, he became the first Milwaukee Brewer, and he also took the horse collar. He was 0 for 3. Now, the interesting thing is, and I've talked about this as well, Terry Crowley was the first designated hitter for Earl Weaver and the Baltimore Orioles. So I want to find him down here. Now, why is that interesting? Because eventually Weaver would find his DHs in guys like Lee May, guys like Tommy Davis, 2 players I visited before. Davis became a DH. Basically, he was not a very good fielder because he had broken his ankle in his early career, in the early stages of his career with the LA Dodgers. Remember, he had led the league in hitting and RBIs, and then fractured his ankle and was never really the same ball player. Lost speed, could not really be the defensive player. Not that he was a great defensive player prior to his injury, but he was a young player, could hit, really just like, it's interesting, very much like Rico Cardi, very much like Ron Bloomberg, kind of like Punch and Judy line drive hitters. Wasn't known for unbelievable power and all the rest of it. But Tommy Davis was a professional hitter, and he had many years of success with the Orioles in 73, 74, 75, helping the Orioles to a couple of divisions and all the rest of it. Interestingly enough, though, Crowley, in his first, and why I think it's interesting is Crowley actually had the best day after Tony Oliva. He actually went 2 for 4 with a run scored, and he had a couple of walks as well in the game as they played the Brewers. Ed Kirkpatrick, and I was really surprised with him. I always remember Ed Kirkpatrick as a catcher outfielder. Now, his baseball card from '69 has him as an outfielder, but I think you know where I'm coming from with this. When you're a catcher outfielder, not great speed, probably lumber a little bit, but he would become the first DH for the Kansas City Royals in their history, and eventually that job would go to Hal McRae, who just seemed to fit snugly into the position of being a DH. And there is definitely a psychology that's different from being a DH as opposed to being a pinch hitter, and as opposed to playing both the field and hitting as well. And really, when I think about it, I think about McRae. I would regard him as a professional hitter. I would definitely say that Lee May, who would supplant Tommy Davis. Tommy Davis would go off. Lee May would bring a little bit more, obviously more power, some walks, but he would hit about 250 as opposed to maybe Tommy Davis hitting about 30, 40 points higher, but not with the lumber that Lee May would provide. But 2 quality DHs for the Orioles. And then, actually, I didn't even realize this when I went a little bit later on. Actually, the DH for the 83 Orioles, I was always happy now. I am happy that I saw this, was none other but Ken Singleton, who I always felt should have been the 79 MVP in the American League. He actually, I think at age 36 or 37, drew 99 walks for that Orioles team that won the World Series over the Phillies and had a good season at the bat as well. But you can see how the Orioles kind of plucked players off the roster, and they were very similar. Crowley, kind of slow of foot outfielder. Lee May, a first baseman. Tommy Davis, slow of foot because of injury, basically a first baseman early in his career, an outfielder. And then Ken Singleton was slow of foot as well, was a right fielder, but did not have the greatest of all speed. All of them could draw some walks. they were Tommy Davis, at least Lee May was a little bit more strikeout prone, but you have Davis, Crowley. Crowley had a pretty good stick. Not an awesome player, but he got wood on the bat. Very rarely did he strike out. So you could see where the Weaver and the Baltimore Oriole philosophy was from. Johnny Ellis, though, was a different story. Ellis, in his debut, went 0 for 4 for the Cleveland Indians. Ellis, of course, I had to put him out there, Yankee fans, because he was an ex-Yankee, was a catcher, first baseman, ready for – you can actually start to see along the same lines. Most of them primarily were outfielders. In fact, the only infielder you could actually say was Mike Andrews, who actually was even though he's in a Red Sox uniform here, he was actually – Mike Andrews was not an Oakland A at the time, would become an Oakland A later on in the year. And, of course, there was that famous World Series incident where he got thrown off for making 2 errors, and Charlie Finley in the 73 series got rid of him. Actually, though, Mike Andrews was the first DH for the Chicago White Sox. He went 1 for 3. Got his hit off Dick Bosman. Rico Carty was for Texas. He went 1 for 4. And Bill North is probably the outlier of them all, because even Gates was known as a great pinch hitter for the Tigers. He actually went 0 for 4 in his debut as a DH. Bill North was interesting. He's the first one. Most of the other guys were in the meat of the order. But Bill North with the 73 A's actually led off as a DH and went 2 for 5 in the ball game as they played Minnesota. And it's interesting that he's an outlier, didn't steal a base in the game. Actually, what I did notice, here's what I did. I took and this is why I want to explain this over maybe 2 shows, because I can really delve into some of the players, because I think it's a lot of fun seeing these old players and all the rest of it. But I took the opening day lineups from 73, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. I did that 20 years later to see had it changed at all in terms of philosophy by the manager. So I took from 1993 to 1999, and then I took another 20 years. 2 reasons why I did this. One, it was faster. I just didn't have time to do, but maybe I will next week. But I also said to myself, if I give it 20 years, let's see if there was an evolution. Now, to be fair, the real evolution was this. From 1973 to 79, here's what you were getting. On a typical ball club, you were going to get 19 homers and 65 RBIs out of your 73 group of guys who were your DHs. But by 2023, like I said, it was up to 25 home runs. Actually, it was higher than that. It was actually 31 home runs and over 100 RBIs. So you can see that not only did they fit, they took away probably the Bill North types as the designated hitter, other than to maybe give them a day off. But the designated hitter, and the designated hitter for many things was, you do have a Dave Winfield, you do have a David Ortiz, but Ortiz was coming into his own. So he was young, really couldn't play the position, wasn't a great defensive position player, but had an unbelievable bat. So you said, you know what, don't worry about fielding anymore, just become and focus on full-time hitting. And you can see the 3 beast years that he had when the Red Sox won the World Series. So it is pretty interesting. Gates Brown, I would say, being a pinch hitter, you're more inclined to just looking for a single to get on base. All right? So they gravitated away from guys you would say, hey, that might have been perfect. But as a pinch hitter, you're just really just thinking about just getting on base. As a DH, you're thinking more of putting the ball not just in play, but being, I would say, offensive-minded. And I think real baseball fans will know what I mean. There's a difference between being a DH, and I think this is what my primitive stats are proving with just using opening day. But managers are seeing the DH as a full frontal assault on the pitcher. That DH has to be just like your cleanup hitter, just like your best hitter in the order, your third hitter in the order. And so they really have to get a guy who can bash the ball. In the early stages, I think what they were doing, and obviously the managers were looking at it, Crowley was seen as a pinch hitter, Gage Brown a pinch hitter, Ollie Brown. I would say that Ron Blomberg, remember there was a guy who came up with another thing. Well, the platoon was in the early 70s, and it is still today, but it was really coming into focus, and Bloomberg was really being a platoon player. So now they had another spot for him to play. Not a great fielder as well, but I think you know where I'm coming from. A pretty good hitter, can't really find him a position, so you make him the DH. But he was seen probably many times as a pinch hitter. Kirkpatrick, the same thing. As I said, the only outlier on this page, aside from David Ortiz, who is pretty much the evolution of the DH in baseball today, was Bill North, because he was known for speed, get maybe about 4 or 5 home runs a year, score some runs, steal a lot of bases, and let off. And like I said, most DHs are in the meat of the order. And of course, here is 2 guys that you would definitely describe as having injuries, multiple injuries, especially later in their career. Tony O and Orlando Cepeda had knee injuries, which definitely curtailed any kind of defensive range that they would have in the outfield or at first base. So the DH was made for them. For Oliva, he would only last a couple of more years. Same with Cepeda, but it would have been interesting to see. They might have been, had it come, let's just say the DH came in 1965 instead of 1973, or even 1970 instead of 73. These 2 would have been what I believe David Ortiz is regarded as today. They would have been able, because they were great professional hitters. I mean, they're both Hall of Famers, but you would have seen probably even better performances out of them because they wouldn't have to play the field. They still gave you some beast years, but concentrating just as being a DH, I think both would have excelled in the same realm as David Ortiz. Now, Mike Andrews, second baseman, kind of like in the Bill North for the White Sox. Actually, the White Sox had a guy in their team who I've talked about many times, Dick Allen, who would have been a perfect designated hitter. And Tanner could easily have used him as a designated hitter. And what's the shame is, remember, he gets hurt, breaks his leg, Dick Allen, and really is never the same player after winning the MVP. Then 73 gets hurt and then comes back in 74. So you're talking about a guy who probably would have been better situated as the DH. Tom McCraw, interesting. I have him as a White Sox, but he was California's first DH, and of course, he didn't do all that well. Tom McCraw would be probably seen as a Terry Crowley, maybe even like a poor man's Terry Crowley. And, listen, any guy who makes the major leagues, I'm looking for words to describe Tom McCraw, but he was 1 for 3 actually for the Angels. Got his hit off Steve Busby. And there's a guy, another good pitcher. Early in his career. I think he was like 17 and 16 and 16 and 17. I'll have to take a look at that. But Tom McCraw, lefty, kind of like Terry Crowley. All right. Otto Velez. It's amazing how many ex-Yankees seem to be up here. And Leroy Stanton. And of course, Stanton, is made famous because he was the first Mariner to be, and in fact, I think that year he had 27 home runs. Now, The big Mariner, who would become their DH before really Edgar Martinez made the position. It's funny. Now that I think about this, but Edgar Martinez, when you think of DHs, you think of two guys, and they're totally different hitters. Edgar Martinez, he's more of the line of Tommy Davis, all right? Tommy Davis and or Rico Carty, all right? And David Ortiz, more in the lines of the Orlando Cepedas. And it's interesting that Willie Horton was their DH and actually made the All-Star team for Seattle. Later on in his career, I think he was about 36, had a really good season for the Mariners. Maybe he didn't make the thing. I just always remember seeing him. But here's not the greatest of fielders. In fact, he was one of those few players that would go out to the outfield and play with a batting helmet in the outfield, because I guess he was always afraid of the ball hitting him. He would wear it even not just in hostile places. He wore it even at home in Detroit and in Seattle. His hometown fans were not throwing bottles at him. So you can tell he was not the best outfielder. Capable, helped out the 68 Tigers as best he could, but Gold Glover, no. Ollie Brown, kind of like one of those tweeners. He goes to Milwaukee, been traded around, had a couple of good seasons with the Padres. So I think that the Brewers were hoping they could strike lightning, capture lightning in the bottle, maybe get the 20 home runs, maybe the 80 RBIs out of it. It wasn't to happen for them. They, though, would get a pretty good DH along the lines of Edgar Martinez in the name of Paul Molitor, of course, a Hall of Famer. And Molitor was not the worst of fielders. He came up as a second baseman, was moved to third, could play first, play the outfielder, kind of like a Pete Rose. You could play a number of positions. Okay, master of none, jack of all trades, master of none. But he did enough. He was competent enough that he didn't hurt the ball club. But again, here's the DH. Probably was perfect for eventually Molitor. Got a number of years out of it. I think won 2 World Series. Well, one World Series with 2 different teams, Minnesota and Toronto. In fact, the one year, he had a beast year for Toronto. Ready for this? Molitor was 22, 111, and 332 for the 93 Blue Jays. The year before, Dave Winfield was the DH, 26, 108, 290. And interestingly enough, I didn't know this, in 1991, Chili Davis, who would be the DH on 2 different World Series winning teams, amazingly enough, he would do the 1999 Yankees, 19 and 78, and the Minnesota Twins, 1991, 29, 93, 277. Actually, of all the guys that probably meet the mark, it's a guy by the name of Carl Everett, 23, 87, hit 267 for the 2005 White Sox. Pretty interesting. I'm going to cut the show a little bit short this week, only because of other obligations, and I would like to focus on these guys next week. Otto Velez, the first DH for the Toronto Blue Jays. I think he was secured by the Blue Jays in the expansion draft. He actually went 2 for 4 off Ken Brett with a run scored. Actually, ready for this? In 73, all right, the American League DHs were 10 for 46. They hit 218 with only that 1 home run by Oliva. By 1977, they were 16 for 51, all right, a little bit better batting average. Had 3 homers and 2 doubles on opening day. The home runs in 1977 coming from Jimmy Wynn, Yankee, Bernie Carbo. I want to spend some time with Carbo, and Earl Williams, the Montclair State guy for Oakland. Carbo is another interesting guy because he drew some walks, had some good pop to the opposite field Of course, he's known for that Red Sox home run in Game 6, the 3-run shot. But Carbo, when he first came up, had 21 home runs in 1970. And then I think what happened was with Carbo, he fell in love. Well, he moved out of Crosley. And I don't think Crosley was a big lefties park per se. It was a hitter's ballpark. Carbo did have a good inside-out swing. And I think probably what he tried to do in 71 was pull the ball, went downhill from there in terms of his career, and became then kind of a utility player. But Carbo, let's just say this. Imagine if let's just say 1970, Carbo comes up and they have the DH. He might have made himself a career as a full-time DH. Remember, in 75, when he was with the Red Sox had a ton of good players. They had Cecil Cooper. They still had Yaz. They had Rice and Fred Lynn made their debuts as rookies of the year. So, and they also had Dwight Evans. So you have 5 guys that you really basically have 4 defensive slots, and then the 5th guy would become the DH. So it didn't give much room when you think about it for Bernie Carbo being a DH on that team. Perhaps he had gone to another team or been with another team, he would have been a natural DH. Let's say, I don't know, for the Angels, or actually, maybe Detroit. Okay? Eventually, those positions would be filled. Rusty Stahl would become the DH for a few times. And Darrell Evans would be the 84 DH for the Tigers. All very similar kinds of guys. But they all had to have definitely or defined pop in their bat, or had to be like a Ron Blomberg or a Rico Carty. They had to be a line drive, punch and Judy hitter that could hit the gaps and all the rest of it. The Johnny Ellises, the Ed Kirkpatricks, the Otto Velezes, and the Tom McCraws were not the DHs that they were really looking for. Slotted in there, and of course, were not to be. The great DHs, either a gap hitter, Hal McRae, power hitter, David Ortiz. Hey, this is Will O'Toole. Thanking you again for visiting us at Park Ridge Sports History, and I will continue this DH, the evolution of DH, in our next show. Thanks very much to Howard for the inspiration. See you guys next week.